Welcome to episode 70 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 15 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Anshel Sag. Let's get started with my first topic. And this week it was announced that China Mobile extended a pretty large tender with respect to its 5G deployment, and both Ericsson and Nokia missed out. Is this surprising? Likely not, given the geopolitical situation that's going on right now. This wasn't surprising. You actually had some information to share relative to these operators with Dish in a moment, but what are your thoughts?
I think this was the one that ZTE and Huawei won, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, it totally looks like it's a geopolitical decision, especially since China Mobile is pretty heavily owned by the U.S. government or by the Chinese government. Was a little slip there, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like we're kind of getting to the point where, in many scenarios, we aren't necessarily having the best vendors win the deals because now politics are being involved in choosing 5G infrastructure vendors.
Yeah, and this is something that Huawei has been pointing at for quite some time. They started, many years ago, simply backward engineering, telecom equipment, and flash forward, they hold a, not that patent counting is any sort of indication of innovation, but they're certainly one of the most prolific patent filers, even in Europe. And so, their argument has been that, in sort of bifurcating this and making it political, that, basically, operators are losing out on, kind of, best of breed solutions and, and that sort of thing. And, obviously, time will tell here, but certainly that's the way, things have been heading for quite some time. So again, no major surprises, but just wanted to get your input on that. But let's move to your first topic this week, and you want to talk about Movandi and mmWave repeaters.
Yeah, and you actually got a chance to meet some of the Movandi people when we were at the Qualcomm Smart Cities event. So they build these 5G repeaters specifically for mmWave, and they've actually been trying to prove out this technology for quite some time. So they've actually already done some of these trials before, and they're using their Beam XR technology for their indoor repeaters. And this is kind of an extension of that. So what they did is they were able to actually show that they were able to achieve 2.7 gigabits per second in a moving vehicle, which is already quite the achievement when you consider that mmWave does not do well when you're moving from cell to cell. And they were able to do it going 27 miles an hour, which is a perfectly reasonable speed inside of the city. I wouldn't consider that a highway speed, but I also wouldn't try to cover mmWave on the highway. So for a very dense city, this could actually work very well. And they were able to do this over a 3-mile route along De Anza Boulevard in Cupertino, which is a different trial than the one they did in San Jose. So they're now trying and trialing this technology in different parts of the valley. They are based out of Irvine, but they're doing a lot of their testing in Silicon Valley. And they were able to do this over 24 different points of signal with handoffs occurring between them. They said that they were able to also stream video live using this demo, and they were able to do it over multiple video streaming services, including Verizon's BlueJeans, Zoom, and Webex, and that they were able to maintain speeds of about 86 to 177 megabits without the repeaters. And those speeds are very inconsistent. So increasing those speeds to 1.0 1.6 gigabits per second is much better. And they were saying that on the low end, the repeater was getting 300 megabits per second, which is really impressive. So the real deal here is this is not only a technology that gets good speeds, but actually its primary purpose is to get good coverage and to do so in a way that allows for a video service not to drop off, which, video is probably one of the most latency intensive applications. So you'll be able to notice if there's any inconsistency with the signal. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how this gets deployed, and they are a big partner with Verizon. So we could actually see Verizon deploying Movandi's technology in its 5G millimeter wave network to improve coverage relatively soon.
Yeah, I think about the applications for transportation and logistics, and like you mentioned, at that speed, those aren't highway speeds. But if you start thinking about trains, public buses, that sort of thing, the application could be quite compelling. So, and actually, I want to talk about millimeter wave in my second topic. I will apologize to our listeners and viewers. I'm in Key West, Florida, and just had a series of, I think, fighter jets fly over my home here. So if you heard that on the audio, that's what's going on. But let's move to my second topic, and I want to talk about Ericsson. And they recently conducted a proof of concept in Seattle with a company called PowerLight. And what PowerLight does is they use laser technology to power things wirelessly. And so this proof of concept powered actually a 5G millimeter wave base station in Seattle and did it quite successfully. So the thought is this gimmick or is it a game changer? And from my perspective, it's one thing, connecting base stations wirelessly. But if you think about millimeter wave, and we've talked about this before in prior podcasts, you do need densification given the propagation of that signal. And certainly, if you think about small cell devices, wireless connectivity could be quite compelling, because one of the challenges with small cells is just where do you put all those things? So what are your thoughts?
I haven't looked into PowerLight, but I know of multiple opportunities to deliver power using light or using other, wireless transmissions. My biggest issue is just these usually are very wildly inefficient.
Right.
So I think efficiency will need to improve before these are deployed. But that said, not having to run power or data to a small cell could, one, potentially make it smaller, and two, allow you to put it in places you wouldn't have been able to put it before, because you can't, run cables to it. Like, there are probably some light poles that you could probably install on that you wouldn't be able to install on previously, because you can just retrofit them instead of having to drill through them and run power and data through them. So it could potentially lower the cost of deployment long term, but I worry about the power efficiency, because ultimately power is still one of the biggest costs long term of running a 5G network, and efficiency, power, how that goes.
Yeah. So it is interesting, and it'll be cool to see how this develops over time. But let's move to your second topic this week, and you want to talk about Dish, and they're being pretty aggressive and making some statements relative to traditional infrastructure.
Yeah, so they kind of took the wraps off of what they're doing. They're Dave Mayo basically is kind of in charge of helping roll out their network. And he kind of told the story of how he got there, and how they've gotten to this point. And he talked about how they have over 1,000 people now working on this deployment, and that he had to help blow up the entire process and say we can't have a centralized rollout process. We have to have everything regionally operated and decentralize things. So He's taken a lot of his learnings from T-Mobile in helping to roll out Dish. But one of the interesting things is they are not using any Ericsson or Nokia equipment in their network. They're building their own equipment in their own 5G warehouses and shipping them out to the towers where they need them. And he went as far as to call Ericsson and Nokia the Scandinavian Mafia, which I don't think will necessarily win him any fans. And if he ever ends up needing one of them, I don't think those discussions are going to go very well.
Or
So I
they'll
think
have to get the checkbook out and write a bigger check, right?
yeah. But also, he did disclose that they are using Taiwan's microelectronics technology, Fujitsu, Mavenir, Altiostar, Amazon, as well as Nexus One as network infrastructure vendors across hardware, software, and cloud. So we do have a pretty good idea of now who they're working with and what they're doing, and obviously that they're doing this all over Open RAN. But yeah, it's interesting, and I think we're still very early days for Dish, and I think they're actually going to be taking a long time to roll things out, but they're going to have to move as fast as possible if they want to hit their 2025 target date.
Yeah, and the whole Mafia reference, it's no secret that Nokia is very bullish of all of the traditional infrastructure providers on Open RAN, and so he might have cut off his nose to spite it all, but it'll be interesting to see how this rolls out. I agree with you. They continue to sort of push things out. I think initially they were talking about some sort of proof of concept around the CES timeframe in January with their deployment in Las Vegas, but time will tell, definitely. So, but let's move to my third and final topic this week, and I want to talk about Google. And they announced that they plan to invest over $1 billion within the African continent over the next 5 years. And so the question is, can this help bridge the continent's digital divide, and will 5G play a role? And certainly, as I read through the announcement, yeah, it's still very, very high level right now. But there were some references to specifically investment in an undersea cable, which obviously that's going to be critical, from a back channel connectivity perspective. But Africa is also the continent of Africa is also a place where you still have 2 and 3G deployments, and just now some of the larger nations are coming into the LTE world. So, but with what's going on with the disaggregation, with 5G and Open RAN and all of that, I'm wondering if Google can't help sort of maybe accelerate that deployment timeline, and maybe for some of these African nations, if they're just getting LTE out the door, I mean, maybe that can help, rapidly accelerate them into a 5G world. So wondering what your thoughts are on this.
Honestly, I think knowing what I know about Africa, which is admittedly not enough, $1 billion is nothing. If I thought that Google was really serious about this, I would have said 10 billion over the next 5 years, or 10 billion over the next 10 years. But $1 billion over 5 years, that's $200 million, a continent with over 1 billion people. And realistically, they're probably going to be focusing on countries like Nigeria, where there's a lot of population density and lots of people on the internet. So I just think that, Google has had, technology efforts to potentially improve connectivity in Africa, like, Project Loon, which it did eventually blow up. So it doesn't really, to me, feel like there's much going on. Building undersea cables is great, because you're going to need to bring the bandwidth in for it to be a sustainable growth for connectivity. But I do think ultimately connectivity is the first and foremost problem that needs to be solved if you want to modernize Africa. And the issue is that there's a lot of people who are not interested in having foreigners do these things.
Sure.
So I think it would be more beneficial for Google to find partners in Africa to build things out together instead of trying to, do maybe what Facebook did in India, where
Right.
they basically just took over the market, and now Facebook is a very powerful entity. But yeah, I just think that there needs to be more investment in Africa overall, and $1 billion is kind of
Yeah.
not much, especially for a company the size of Google.
Yeah, I agree, and I agree with you as well. I mean, again, this announcement, it was just made. It'll probably be very organic in nature and grow over time. I agree with you. Google partnering with other companies is the right way to go. I will mention that I'm knowledgeable of the fact that Huawei has invested in parts of Africa. Many people point to that as sort of country building and that sort of thing. But they've historically Huawei's had a footprint there just because they've and in fact in rural America as well have offered infrastructure that's very aggressively priced. And speaking to some of their competitors like an Ericsson and Nokia, some of the pricing is just in the past was pretty wacky and not profitable. So, but I agree with you. It's a good start, but more will have to be done to really bring the African continent into kind of modern connectivity. So, but let's move to your third and final topic this week, and you want to talk about the 3.45 gigahertz auctions that are kicking off.
Yeah, so this is a yet another mid-band auction. So it's extremely valuable. Currently, we're in the first round of the auction. They basically do a new round almost every day, and there's many rounds. And every round, the bidding goes up and up. But the first round was a $600 million round, which is a pretty big first round because it's only going to go up from there. The one thing to note is that the FCC has a reserve price set at $15 billion for this, meaning that between all carriers, they need to raise at least $15 billion because they need to be able to pay the incumbent users to get off the band. In this case, it's a federal user, which means that they're just going to have to they have to be able to pay for new equipment and those kinds of things to move them to whatever band they're moving to.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is this is 100 megahertz of spectrum. So it's less spectrum than was available before, but it's still a lot of spectrum. And there is a 40 megahertz cap for any individual single bidder. So nobody can acquire more than 40 megahertz, which I believe was similar in the C-band auction, at least initially, for the first 100 megahertz. So I believe we'll probably kind of see a similar situation here where we get maybe a 40-40 and a 20, depending on who's bidding. But they're saying that because these auctions are not public until they're completed, there are 33 bidders. So technically anybody can bid for this auction. But I have a feeling that all the four carriers are bidding on this auction, and that we'll probably see AT&T lead this one a little bit more, possibly with T-Mobile following and Verizon also following, because Verizon spent $45 billion on C-band. So they aren't necessarily going. Actually, I think it was 35, but then you add the 10 for the build out costs. But $35 billion is a lot to pay for spectrum. So I think that they're going to back off on some of their bidding. And honestly, I think AT&T will as well, because they also spent quite a bit. But I think AT&T has a little bit more appetite because they seem to be more focused on their network. And I think that this lower band will actually have better propagation. So I think AT&T, would benefit from having 40 megahertz of this. And I think T-Mobile, it depends on where they might do this, but I think T-Mobile might actually be a little bit more picky with what they get because they already own 2.5 and they also got some C-band.
Right.
So I think this would be kind of something that would allow them to diversify their spectrum holdings in places where maybe they don't have as much 2.5 or didn't get any C-band.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. Great insights. And I would think US Cellular would be, in the hunt, on this as well. They didn't really acquire a lot of C-band based on my recollection. And, this allows them, to your point, a better spectrum profile with respect to propagation and not require the need for as much densification of small cells. But here we go. We're off to the races again on another auction. I mean, it'll, pop your popcorn. We'll keep tabs on it. But hey, buddy, it was another great podcast this week. Why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide insights on a specific 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at WillTownTech, and I'm at Anshel. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week.